The festival of the twin suns was the most brilliant day in the Draconian calendar, a time when the Empire's two suns, Helios and Celis, aligned in a celestial embrace, flooding the crystalline spires of the imperial palace with a light so pure and potent it felt like living hope. Across the floating citadel, which hung like a carved jewel against the velvet black of space, the roar of dragon nobility echoed through vast halls. Laughter rumbled like distant thunder, and the clink of gemstone goblets was a constant, cheerful music. The very air thrummed with power, with legacy, with the unassailable joy of a dynasty secure in its might. Every chamber glowed, every hall echoed with life. Every chamber, except one, in the highest tower, where the gravity dampeners created a perpetual, gentle buoyancy, as if the room itself were breathing, a small dragon lay dying. The walls here were carved from single pieces of starfire crystal, fracturing the festival's magnificent light into 1,000 despairing rainbows that danced across the still form of Princess Kaith. She was so small, no larger than a human child of 7 years, a fragile vessel for such a mighty lineage. Her scales, which should have shimmered with the captured fire of nascent nebulae and the iridescent sheen of comet tails, were dull. They were the color of dead asteroid rock, of cold, forgotten moons. Her delicate wings, usually held with the innate pride of her bloodline, drooped limply over the edges of her ornate sleeping platform, the traditional silks of dragon royalty looking less like adornments and more like funeral wrappings. Each breath she took was a shallow, ragged thing, a desperate battle fought in the quiet of the room, a stark counterpoint to the revelry beyond. Beside her, a mountain of scaled power and armored grief stood vigil. Emperor Thraxus, the terrible, scourge of the Outer Rim, destroyer of the mechanoid uprising, a being who had lived 3,000 years and commanded fleets that could darken stars, felt a helplessness so profound it threatened to crack the very foundation of his soul. His massive form, encased in armor etched with the glowing runes of vanquished empires, cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock his impotence. His wings, each powerful enough to generate hurricane-force winds in a planetary atmosphere, trembled with a fine, barely contained vibration. It was the tremor of a father's heart breaking. A soft chime echoed in the chamber, and a sleek, silver-scaled dragon, Hyan, the Emperor's most trusted advisor, glided in. His voice was a low, respectful murmur. "Another specialist has arrived from the core worlds, Your Majesty. A drive, Meridian. He claims to have studied similar energy-wasting syndromes among the dragon colonies of Andromeda 7. Thraxus did not turn. His eyes, burning like miniature suns, remained fixed on his daughter's face. "Send him in," he rumbled, the sound weary, stripped of its usual world-shattering power. "Though I have little hope he will fare better than the 47 who came before him." Hope was a currency Thraxus had spent lavishly and was now bankrupt of. 3 hours later, Drive, Meridian left, his tail drooping, his diagnostic orbs blinking with inconclusive data. He was just as baffled as his predecessors. The Emperor had poured wealth equivalent to a small planet's annual output into finding a cure. He had summoned the greatest medical experts, xenobiologists, and energy healers from every corner of the known galaxy. He had even, in a moment of desperate humility, consulted the ancient dragon oracles who dwelt in the quantum monasteries, beings who communed with the fabric of reality itself. All had come. All had failed. The palace staff, a myriad of species from across the coalition, whispered in the hushed tones of those who serve power and fear its fragility. In the lower corridors, where the light from the twin suns was filtered and weak, they shared their theories. Some said it was a curse, the final, spiteful revenge of the defeated mechanoids, a virus so subtle it was undetectable to any scanner. Others, with a superstitious shudder, believed it was a cosmic balancing, a price demanded by the universe for Thraxus's countless victories, his most precious treasure taken in exchange for his empire. Thraxus knew the truth was both simpler and infinitely more painful. It was a ghost, the ghost of his beloved mate, Queen Silistra. She had died during Kaith's hatching, her vibrant life force mysteriously, catastrophically drained in the very moment their daughter had entered the world. The egg had been perfect, the incubation flawless. Yet, in that triumphant instant, a light had gone out in the universe, leaving Thraxus with a daughter who seemed to be slowly following her mother into the silence. He had surrounded Kaith with the best care the galaxy could offer. Dragon nannies whose experience spanned centuries. Android servants with flawless efficiency ratings. A psychic healer from the telepathic colonies whose mind could soothe planetary civil wars. None had lasted more than a few days. Kaith, in her profound weakness and sorrow, would not respond to them. She would not eat for them. She would barely acknowledge their existence, retreating further into her own silent world. It was into this atmosphere of despairing opulence that a human woman named Marina Caldwell inadvertently wandered. By all rights, she should never have set foot in the royal wing. Humanity were the newcomers to the Galactic Coalition, their species having achieved faster than light travel only 2 centuries prior. They were clever, adaptable, and served adequately in technical and service roles, but they were viewed by the elder races, especially the dragons, with a mixture of curiosity and condescension. They were fleeting, fragile things. Marina had been delivering a package of specialized medical supplies from the human quarter, another one of Thraxus's desperate gambles, when she took a wrong turn. The palace was a labyrinth of shimmering, identical corridors, and the simple directional tablet she'd been given had glitched. Following the sound of what she thought was a malfunctioning air circulator, but which her human instincts recognized as the sound of labored, distressed breathing, she had pushed open a door. She found herself in a chamber that stole her breath. It was beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. And in the center, on a floating platform, was the source of the breathing, a small, sick dragon child who looked more like a statue of grief than a living being. The guards, hulking draconian sentinels, moved immediately to intercept her, their claws scraping against the crystal floor. But before they could reach her, a small, clawed hand lifted from the bed. It was a tremulous, weak gesture, but it carried the weight of command. "Stay." The word was a whisper, a sigh, but it echoed in the sudden stillness of the room. The guards froze. Marina froze. It was the first word Princess Kate had spoken in weeks. The Emperor was summoned. He arrived like a storm, his presence filling the room, his anger a palpable heat. He found the human woman not cowering, not prostrating herself, but simply sitting on the edge of the platform, her small, five-fingered hand gently holding his daughter's three-clawed one. And for the first time in months, Kate's breathing seemed less ragged, the space between each gasp a fraction longer. "What is your designation, human?" Thraxus's voice rumbled, causing the floating medical scanners to wobble. In their orbits, the woman looked up, her eyes, a simple, human brown, meeting his blazing orbs. She showed no terror, only a calm, weary resolve. "Marina Caldwell, Your Majesty. I apologize for the intrusion. I was merely lost." "You will remain," the Emperor commanded, the order leaving no room for refusal. "You will care for my daughter. Fail, and I will personally escort you to the nearest black hole." Marina simply nodded. "I will care for her," she said, her voice soft but steady. Perhaps, Thraxus thought later, that was the quality Kate had sensed. Not power, not knowledge, but a profound, unshakable calm. A quiet strength that asked for nothing and promised everything. For 3 months, Marina became the silent, steady heartbeat at the center of the princess's world. She arrived before the first sun, Helios, painted the spires with light, and stayed long after Celis had dipped below the horizon. She learned to prepare the complex, nutrient-rich traditional dragon foods, grinding them down, adjusting temperatures and textures for a child's weakened digestion. She read to Kate from the ancient dragon histories, her human accent bending the guttural old draconic words into something new, something strange and beautiful that seemed to capture the little princess's attention. She learned wing massage techniques from the royal physiotherapists, her small, gentle hands working the delicate, atrophying membranes with a tenderness that the mighty dragon healers could not replicate. She was an island of humanity in a sea of scale and fire. And she observed. She watched with the careful, detailed attention of someone who had learned to survive among beings who could, quite literally, incinerate her with a sneeze. She saw the patterns the sophisticated scanners missed. She noticed how Kate's energy seemed to leach away when she lay flat on the sleeping platform. She saw the child's instinctive reluctance to be near the floor, her weak pleas to be carried or to rest on the floating cushions higher in the room. She documented, in a simple human notebook, the trembling that seized the princess in the deepest part of the night cycle, when the palace's luminous panels dimmed to simulate darkness, as if the shadows themselves were a poison. One evening, as Thraxus kept his nightly vigil, his massive head bowed, Marina approached him. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice soft but clear. "May I speak freely?" He turned his great horned head toward her. Steam, not of anger but of exhaustion, plumed from his nostrils. "You have earned that right, human. Speak. I believe there is something in this room that is making the princess sick," Marina said. "Not something medical, not a virus or a genetic condition. Something else." The Emperor's eyes narrowed to glowing slits. I have had this chamber scanned 812 times. Every energy spectrum, every subatomic particle, every possible biological or technological contamination has been searched for. The room is cleaner than the vacuum of space. With respect, Your Majesty, Marina persisted, her gaze unwavering. Your scanners are calibrated for known threats. What if this is something older? Something that predates your technology? Something that doesn't register as a threat because it's woven from a different kind of thread? Thraxus was about to dismiss this as human superstition when a memory, long buried under centuries of conquest and rule, surfaced. Silistra's mother, the ancient dragon matriarch, Nyxara. She had been violently opposed to their mating. She came from the oldest dragon bloodlines, those who remembered when dragons ruled singular worlds, bound to the soil and the sea, before they had conquered the stars. She saw Thraxus, for all his power and conquests, as an unworthy upstart, a dragon who had diluted their pure, majestic heritage by embracing technology and allying with lesser species. Nyxara had died 300 years ago, a full century before Kate's birth. But before her death, she had been the last true master of the old ways, the rituals, the traditions, the beliefs that most modern dragons dismissed as the superstitions of a bygone era. A cold dread, colder than the void between galaxies, began to coil in Thraxus's gut. "Continue your investigation, human," he commanded, his voice low. "You have my permission to search wherever your instincts led you." Marina bowed and returned to Kate's side. The princess was sleeping fitfully, her breathing becoming more and more shallow, as if she were slowly dissolving into the air. As Marina watched, she noticed a detail she had seen 100 times but never truly seen. The child's tail, which should have been curled comfortably around her body in sleep, was held rigid, its tip elevated slightly off the sleeping platform. It was a subtle thing, a gesture of avoidance, as if the surface beneath her was unpleasant, or worse. Moving with a silence born of a life spent not drawing attention to herself, Marina activated a small, handheld luminescence rod. It was a simple human tool, one the dragon servants mocked for its primitive, focused beam compared to their elegant, floating light orbs. She knelt beside the massive sleeping platform, her human joints protesting the hard, unyielding crystal of the floor. The platform itself floated serenely 3 feet above the ground, held aloft by silent gravity manipulators. Marina directed the beam of her light into the space beneath. And she froze. There, in the exact center of the shadowed space, directly beneath where Kate's heart would be, sat an object that defied reason. It was a crystalline container, roughly the size of a human head, made from a material Marina had never seen. It didn't reflect light. It seemed to absorb it, to drink it, creating a pocket of absolute darkness even under the direct illumination of her rod. Its surface was covered in symbols that made her eyes water and her head ache to look at directly, as if they existed in more spatial dimensions than her human brain could process. And inside, visible through the semi-translucent crystal, was a collection of objects that made her blood run cold, even without understanding their full significance. A single, massive scale, ancient and weathered, that could only have come from a fully mature dragon. A vial of what appeared to be liquid starlight, though it swirled with a viscous, sentient malevolence. A fragment of eggshell, pristine white, veined with delicate gold. And at the very center, wrapped in what looked like strands of silver hair, was a small, meticulously carved figurine of a dragonling, rendered in black stone. It was lying in exactly the same position as Kaith on the platform above. Her hand trembled as she reached for the communication device on her wrist. But before her fingers could touch the interface, a massive, clawed hand fell on her shoulder. She looked up into the face of Emperor Thraxus. His eyes were wide, the fire in them dimmed by a horror so profound it was a physical presence in the room. "Do not move," he rumbled, his voice so low it was more a vibration in the bones than a sound. "Do not touch it. That container. I recognize the craftsmanship." Marina remained perfectly still, a statue in the shadow of the Emperor. Thraxus lowered his colossal form, a gesture of surprising grace for one so large, and peered into the darkness. When his eyes fully comprehended what lay within, a sound escaped him that Marina had never heard from any living thing, least of all a dragon. It was a keening wail, of grief, of understanding, of a pain 3 centuries old finally finding its source. "Nixara," he breathed, the name a curse and a lament. "But she has been dust for 300 years. How?" "Your Majesty," Marina whispered, her own fear subsiding in the face of his raw anguish. "We need to remove it. Now. The princess cannot be moved while that thing remains connected to her," Thraxus finished, his voice regaining some of its steel. "This is dragon magic, the oldest kind, from before we conquered the stars, when we were still bound to single worlds and believed in forces that science has forgotten." The chamber door hissed open and Pion entered, his silver scales reflecting the worried pulse of the medical scanners. "Your Majesty," I detected a power fluctuation. His voice died in his throat as he followed their gaze. His scales paled from brilliant silver to a sickly, ashen gray. "By the breath of the first egg, is that a binding of essence?" Thraxus confirmed, his voice grim. "But modified, corrupted. Instead of protecting, it is feeding." Marina looked between the two dragons, her human mind struggling to bridge the gap between advanced technology and what could only be called magic. "Feeding on what? Life force," Pion explained, his usual composure shattered. "The old matriarchs believed a dragon's essence, their spirit, their vitality, their very self, could be captured, stored, even transferred. This binding, it should have been a shield, a protective ward around the princess. But someone has reversed its polarity, turned it into a siphon. Can't we just destroy it?" Marina asked, the simple, human solution seeming the most logical. Both dragons recoiled as if she'd suggested setting the palace on fire. "Destroy an active binding," Pion gasped. "It would be like severing an umbilical cord tied to the princess's soul. The backlash would kill her instantly." Marina studied the container again, her light playing over its hateful angles. She saw it now. The faint, sickly purple pulse of the symbols was in perfect, terrible rhythm with Kaith's labored breathing. "Then we need to break the connection first," she said. "How?" Thraxus's single word was heavy with the weight of all his failed hopes. Payan and the Emperor exchanged a glance of shared helplessness. "We don't know," Thraxus admitted, the confession costing him dearly. The knowledge of these rituals died with the old matriarchs. Nyxara. She was the last who truly understood them. Marina stood slowly, her mind racing, sifting through the countless stories she had read to Kaith. Stories of heroes, of ancient pacts, of magic that had rules, that operated on logic, however alien. "Your Majesty," she said, a spark of certainty igniting within her. "In the stories, the bindings always had rules. Conditions that had to be met. Words that had to be spoken. They were never arbitrary. Fairy tales," Payan dismissed weakly. "Stories for hatchlings. Stories that Nyxara would have known," Marina countered. "If she created this binding, even in its corrupted form, she would have followed the old rules. She was, by all accounts, a traditionalist." Thraxus considered this, the logic, however unorthodox, finding purchase in his desperate mind. "What do you propose, human?" Marina looked from the sleeping princess to the dark container. "First, we need to understand what this binding is trying to do. You said it was feeding on her life force, but where is that energy going? Nothing in this room shows any sign of receiving that power." The Emperor's eyes widened, a new, more terrifying possibility dawning. "Unless... No, that's impossible." "What?" Marina and Payan asked as one. "The oldest legends speak of bindings that could preserve essence beyond death," Thraxus said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Storing life force in a vessel, until a suitable recipient could be prepared." "You mean Nyxara was trying to come back?" Marina asked, horrified. "Not precisely," Thraxus said, his mind working through the ancient texts he'd long forgotten. "But perhaps she was trying to preserve something of herself. Her knowledge, her memories, her very personality. Dragons of her generation believed such things could be transferred through essence. She may have intended this as a gift. A way to pass on her wisdom after death. But something went wrong," Marina observed, her practical mind seeing the flaw. "The binding is taking far more than it should. It's not giving anything back. It's just consuming her." Payan, who had been cautiously scanning the container with a handheld device, jerked back. "Your Majesty, I'm detecting quantum entanglement signatures of an incredible complexity. This binding exists partially in our dimension and partially elsewhere. The Shadow Realm," Thraxus breathed, the words laden with ancient dread. "The space between spaces, where the old dragons claimed our spirits dwelt after the body failed, before they were reborn." Marina's idea crystallized. "Your Majesty, you said Nyxara died 300 years ago. But when did this container appear under the princess's bed? It can't have been here long. This chamber is cleaned and scanned daily," Payan said. "It has been for the 7 years of the princess's life. Then someone placed it here recently, Marina concluded. Someone who had access to this chamber, and knowledge of the old ways. Thraxus's wings flared, a sudden, violent motion that sent several floating instruments clattering against the walls. The servant rotation logs. Hyan, pull up everyone who has had access to this chamber in the last year. Now, as Hyan's claws flew over his holographic display, Marina leaned closer to the container, using her simple light to examine every millimeter. And she saw something the dragons, in their horror, had missed. A small, almost invisible crack in the crystal, and around its edge, a dark, dried stain. "Your Majesty," she said quietly. "Someone cut themselves on this. Recently. That's dragon blood, isn't it?" Thraxus bent down, his massive head blocking the light. "By the stars, Hyan, analyze it. Now." Hyan's scanner hummed over the stain. "Already scanning, Your Majesty. The DNA markers are. This can't be right." "What?" "The blood matches the Nyxara family line. But not Nyxara herself. A descendant. Perhaps a great-grandchild of one of her siblings." Thraxus's eyes blazed with a new, focused fury. Nyxara had a sister, Valera. She was banished from the Empire for practicing forbidden rituals. Her line was supposed to have died out. "Apparently not," Marina said softly. She had moved back to Kaith's side, checking the princess's vital signs with a dragon medical wand and her own human intuition. The readings were plummeting. "Your Majesty, her condition is deteriorating rapidly. If this binding is accelerating..." A sound interrupted her. A low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate not from the container, but from the space it occupied. The symbols on its surface began to glow with a sickly, violent purple light. Kaith gasped, her small body convulsing, her back arching in a silent scream. "It's responding to our presence," Hyan cried, backing away. "Or to our discovery." Marina didn't think. She didn't calculate risks or consider protocol. She acted on the pure, uncomplicated instinct of a caretaker. She scooped the small, convulsing dragon princess into her arms, surprised as always by how heartbreakingly light she was, and ran. "The binding," Thraxus roared. "We'll kill her if we don't do something now." Marina shouted back, her voice cracking with a fear and determination that brooked no argument. "Your Majesty, trust me." For a heartbeat, the most powerful being in the sector stared into the eyes of the most fragile. And he nodded. Marina ran from the chamber, carrying Kaith into the small, adjacent room she used for her own rest. The moment they crossed the threshold, the little dragon's convulsions lessened. Her breathing, while still weak, lost its desperate, ragged edge. She fell into a deep, genuine sleep, the first Marina had seen in weeks. Back in the princess's chamber, Thraxus and Hyan watched as the container's glow intensified to a painful glare. The cracks in its surface, which had been hairline, began to spread like a black web. "It's breaking down without the princess's proximity," Hyan observed, his voice tight with panic. "The binding is unstable, it's going to critical failure. Then we have little time," Thraxus said, his voice cold and clear, the voice of the emperor who commanded fleets. He activated his personal comm array, and his voice echoed through every corridor, every hall, every chamber of the palace. Security Chief Skorik, implement full lockdown. No one enters or leaves the palace. And bring me every dragon who has had chamber access in the last year. Use whatever force is necessary. The response was immediate. The distant sounds of the festival were cut off as massive bulkheads slammed shut. Within minutes, a dozen dragons were assembled in the throne room, their scales reflecting the ominous red of the alert lighting. They were a mix of guards, healers, and household staff, all confused and fearful. Among them was an elderly dragoness named Morvana, who served as the palace's senior housekeeper. Her scales were a faded gold, and she carried herself with the quiet dignity of centuries of service. But when her eyes met the emperor's, they dulled with a fear that went far beyond respectful terror. Morvana, Thraxus rumbled, his voice causing the very air to vibrate. You are of the Valera line, are you not? The dragoness tried to maintain her composure, but her claws trembled. A distant relation, your majesty. My great-grandmother was her daughter. But I have served this palace faithfully for 200 years. And in all that time, Thraxus interrupted, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, you waited. You waited for your chance to complete Nixara's work. Morvana's facade crumbled. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a sudden, zealous fire. She was right about you. She spat, her voice gaining strength from her fanaticism. Nixara saw what you would become. A dragon who consorted with lesser species. Who abandoned our pure ways for technology and politics. Your daughter. She carries the blood of the ancient lines through her mother. She deserves better than to be raised in this corruption. So you tried to kill her. Thraxus's roar shook the entire tower. Not kill. Morvana shot back, her body trembling with fervor. Preserve. Transform. The binding was meant to take her weak, diluted essence and replace it with Nixara's pure spirit. The princess would have lived, but as a true dragon. Not this weak hybrid you've allowed her to become. Marina, who had been listening through the open comm link while tending to Kaith, spoke up, her voice calm but cutting through the tension like a knife. Except it didn't work, did it, Morvana? The binding is flawed. It's only taking life, not giving it. It's killing her. Morvana's certainty wavered. The ritual was perfect. I followed every instruction Nixara left behind. Instructions left by someone who had been dead for 300 years, Marina pointed out, her voice relentlessly logical. Written in a time before dragons had achieved space flight, before you understood quantum mechanics or dimensional physics. You tried to merge ancient magic with modern reality, and it created an abomination. Emperor Thraxus stepped toward Morvana, his massive form casting her entirely in shadow. You will tell me how to break the binding. Now, I don't know. Morvana admitted, her defiance crumbling into genuine terror. The instructions only covered the creation, not the dissolution. The binding should have completed itself within days, but it just kept feeding, growing stronger. Hyan, who had been frantically consulting his data pad, looked up sharply. "Your Majesty, I've been analyzing the quantum signatures. The binding isn't just connected to the princess. It's spreading, creating tendrils through the dimensional substrate. It's seeking other compatible energy signatures. If it continues to grow," Thraxus finished, the horror dawning on his face, "it will eventually consume any dragon with a blood connection to the princess." "Which means," Hyan whispered, "the entire royal line." Marina's mind, freed from centuries of draconian dogma, saw a path. "Your Majesty, may I return to the chamber? I need to see the container again." "It's too dangerous," Thraxus protested. "I'm human," Marina reminded him, her voice steady. "The binding has no connection to me. It's keyed to dragon essence. I might be the only one who can interact with it safely." The Emperor considered this, the sheer, illogical strangeness of the situation demanding an illogical solution. He nodded. "Hyan, go with her. Full protective protocols for yourself." They returned to find the chamber thrumming with malevolent energy. The container was pulsing like a diseased heart, the cracks now weeping a viscous, dark substance that seemed to absorb the very light around it. "That's concentrated essence," Hyan whispered in horror. "Pure life force. If that touches any dragon." Marina pulled on thick protective gloves from a medical supply unit and carefully approached. The symbols writhed as she neared, but they didn't cause her the same psychic pain they inflicted on the dragons. She could look at them, study them. "Hyan," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "I need you to translate. These symbols, they're not just decoration. They're instructions. Or maybe, warnings." Hyan maintained a safe distance, using his scanner to capture the shimmering, shifting script. "It's old Draconic. The ceremonial language. Give me a moment." His claws flew over his interface. "Here, the primary inscription reads, 'By blood given and blood received, by the essence of the matriarch's line, let the old ways flow into the new, until the vessel is pure.'" "Blood given and blood received," Marina repeated, turning the phrase over in her mind. "Morvana gave blood when she cut herself. That's the blood given. But who, or what, received it? The binding itself," Hyan said, his eyes widening as the logic unfolded. "It's using the blood as a catalyst. A connection to—" He stopped, his scanner blinking frantically. "Your Majesty, you need to hear this." Thraxus's voice came through the comm. "Report. The binding isn't just trying to resurrect Nyxara or transfer her essence. It's trying to summon her. From the Shadow Realm. The container. It's becoming a gateway." "That's impossible," Thraxus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Not to the ancient dragons," Marina said. She was reading the secondary inscriptions now, with Hyan's hurried translations. "They believed it was a real place. A dimension where dragon essence went after death, waiting to be reborn. But if something went wrong with the summoning," Hyan finished, the pieces clicking into place, "Nyxara could be trapped between realms. Hardly here, hardly there, drawing on the princess's life force to try and complete the transition, but unable to fully manifest. Marina stood, her mind racing down a path that was both terrifying and the only one they had. Then we have to complete the ritual. What? Both dragons exclaimed. But on our terms, Marina said, her voice firm. We either bring Nyxara fully through so we can deal with her, or we send her back completely. We close the gate. And how? By the first egg, do we do that? Thraxus demanded. Marina looked at the pulsing container, then at Pion. The inscription mentions the vessel becoming pure. What if the problem is that Kaith isn't pure enough for the binding? She's young, innocent, but she's also been raised with technology, with modern ideas. She's not the isolated, tradition-steeped vessel Nyxara expected. So, we need a different vessel, Pion said slowly. But who would be compatible? Someone of the bloodline, Marina said, her gaze turning toward the throne room. Someone who understands both the old ways and the new. Someone whose belief in the ritual might be the very bridge we need. She turned to the calm array. Your Majesty, I need you to bring Morvana to the chamber. Absolutely not, Thraxus roared. She tried to murder my daughter. And she's probably the only one who can save her now, Marina argued, her voice rising with passion. Morvana has Valera's blood, she has knowledge of the ritual, and most importantly, she believes in it. Her belief, her very fanaticism, might be the key. She can be the bridge Nyxara's spirit needs to cross over fully. There was a long, heavy pause. Marina could imagine the internal war raging within the Emperor, the father's rage versus the ruler's pragmatism. If this fails, human, Thraxus's voice was flat, dead. It won't, Marina said with a confidence she poured every ounce of her being into. Minutes later, Thraxus arrived, half dragging a terrified Morvana. The elderly dragoness gasped when she saw the state of the container. The dark essence was now oozing freely, and the hum had risen to a piercing whine. It's destabilizing, she breathed. The essence is leaking. If the container breaks completely, Nyxara will be lost forever, and the princess will die, Marina finished. Unless we redirect the binding. Morvana, you wanted to preserve the old ways. Here's your chance. Become the vessel yourself. Morvana's eyes widened in pure terror. I can't. I'm not strong enough. Nyxara was an ancient, a matriarch of immense power. She would overwhelm me, scatter my consciousness to the solar winds. Not if we modify the binding, Marina said. She had been studying the symbols, beginning to understand their twisted logic. Look here, the inscription assumes a one-way transfer. A pouring. But what if we make it an exchange? You give Nyxara a pathway back, but only temporarily. A conversation, long enough for you to break her connection to the princess. That's not how the ritual works. Morvana protested. The ritual already doesn't work. Marina's voice was sharp, impatient. We're improvising. Pion, can you calculate the quantum harmonics needed to create a temporary, resonant bridge instead of a permanent one? The silver dragon's claws flew over his holographic interface, equations and energy diagrams swirling around him. Theoretically, yes, the binding's own matrix could be repurposed. But we'd need a massive, focused energy source to power the transition and maintain the stability of the temporary bridge. Emperor Thraxus stepped forward, his chest beginning to glow with an inner fire. "Use me, Your Majesty. The risk," Hyan began, "is mine to take," Thraxus interrupted, his voice final. He looked at Morvana, his eyes burning into her soul. "You will do this. You will save my daughter and send Nyxara back to wherever she came from. Or I will personally ensure that you spend the rest of your very long life in the crushing gravity of the prison asteroid." Morvana looked from the Emperor's grim face to the deteriorating container, to Marina's determined one. She nodded, her body trembling. I will try." Marina quickly laid out her plan. They would form a triangle around the container. Morvana would be the primary conduit, placing her claws on the crystal. Thraxus would stand behind her, channeling his raw dragon fire into her, which she would then funnel into the binding to power the temporary bridge. Hyan would monitor the quantum fluctuations and maintain a containment field. Marina, being human and thus outside the Dragon Essence network, would be the failsafe. She would manually manipulate the container at the crucial moment, using her physical separation from the energy flow to act where the dragons could not. "What about the princess?" Hyan asked. "Keep her in the other room," Marina said. "The farther from this, the better. Once we break the connection, she should recover quickly." They took their positions. The air crackled with tension and nascent power. Morvana knelt before the pulsating container, her aged claws trembling as she placed them on its cracked, weeping surface. Thraxus stood behind her, his massive form blazing as he built up the immense thermal energy within him, light spilling from between his scales. Hyan activated every scanner and protective field generator he had, weaving a shimmering containment barrier around them. Marina stood ready, a simple metal prybar from a maintenance kit in her hand. It felt absurdly primitive, a toothpick against a mountain. But it was solid, it was real, and it was her only tool. "Begin," Thraxus commanded. Morvana started to chant, her voice a reedy, uncertain thread at first, then gaining strength as the ancient, guttural words of old Draconic flowed from her. The container responded immediately. Its violent pulsing slowed, synchronizing with her chant. The sickly purple glow deepened, becoming a more stable, ominous violet. The cracks in its surface began to seal themselves, the leaking dark essence drawing back inside as if taking a breath. "Quantum signatures spiking," Hyan reported, his voice tight. "The dimensional barrier is thinning. I'm reading a foreign consciousness attempting to interface." Marina watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, as the air directly above the container began to shimmer and warp. A form started to materialize from the nothingness, pulling itself into their reality. It was a dragon of incredible age and power, translucent and wavering like a heat haze, yet radiating an aura of immense, ancient authority. Her scales were the deep, bruised purple of a dying star, her eyes burning with a cold, millennia-old fire. Nyxara's spirit had arrived. The ancient dragoness looked around, her gaze sweeping over them with a contempt that had survived 3 centuries of death. When her eyes fell on Thraxus, they blazed with pure, undiluted hatred. "You," her voice echoed, not in the air, but in their minds, a psychic intrusion that was cold and sharp as ice. "You who corrupted my daughter. Who diluted our pure blood with your modern heresies. I will reclaim what is mine. The child is mine." Thraxus roared back, not with his voice, but with his will, a wave of psychic force that met hers. He released a controlled torrent of dragon fire, a river of pure energy that Morvana, gasping with the strain, absorbed and channeled into the binding. "And you are nothing but a ghost, clinging to a past that is dust." Nyxara's spirit turned its withering gaze toward Morvana. "Child of my sister's line, you have served me well. Surrender yourself to me now. Complete the work. Let my essence flow into you, and together, we shall purify this corrupted lineage." "No," Morvana gasped, her body shaking violently as she fought against the pull of Nyxara's overwhelming presence. "I see now. This is wrong. The princess, she's innocent. Innocence is weakness." Nyxara's psychic voice was a lash. "The old ways are strength. Purity is power. The old ways led to stagnation." The new voice in the psychic space was Marina's. It was quiet, human, unadorned with power, but it carried a conviction that cut through the ancient drama. She had stepped forward, the prybar held firmly in her hands. Nyxara's attention fixed on her, and Marina felt the weight of centuries of pride and hatred press down on her mind. It was like having a mountain dropped on her soul. "A human dares to speak to me." The scorn was absolute. "You insects were not even sapient when I ruled entire systems. You are a fleeting stain on the galaxy." "Maybe not," Marina agreed, her voice trembling but unwavering. She focused on the container, on the physical world, using it as an anchor against the psychic storm. "But we learned something you never did. That strength comes from adaptation. From working together. From accepting change. Not from hiding in the past, trying to force the future into a mold that broke 1,000 years ago." She jammed the metal prybar into the largest, most prominent crack in the container. "No." Nyxara's shriek was a psychic explosion that rattled the very crystals in the walls. Marina twisted the bar with all her strength, putting the full, desperate weight of her body into it. The container did not just break. It sundered. With a sound that was less a noise and more a fundamental tear in the fabric of local reality, the crystal split in two. The concentrated life force within did not stream out. It erupted, an uncontrolled explosion of raw essence and thwarted will. Morvana screamed as a torrent of the energy, and the consciousness riding it, was pulled into her. But it was only a fragment. The rest of Nyxara's ancient spirit, without a proper vessel or a completed binding, began to unravel, dissipating back into the quantum foam from which it had been summoned, pulled back into the shadow realm. "You fool!" Nyxara's voice was fading, growing distant, the psychic pressure lifting. "You've destroyed everything. The knowledge, the power, the legacy of the true dragons. We'll make our own legacy," Thraxus said, his psychic voice firm and final. He stepped forward, his own energy supporting the collapsing Morvana. One that includes all beings. Not just those who worship a dead past. Nyxara's form flickered, her expression shifting from incandescent rage to something else, something almost like sorrow, like the dawning of a realization 3 centuries too late. "My daughter," she whispered, her voice now barely a thought on the wind. "I only wanted to preserve, to protect. You wanted to control," Marina said, her voice gentle now, filled with a pity that transcended species and time. "But love isn't about control. It's about letting go." The ancient dragon's spirit looked one last time at Thraxus, and in that final moment, all the hatred was gone, replaced by a weary, ancient grief. "Take care of her," she whispered. And Marina wasn't sure if she meant Silistra's memory, or Kaith. Then, she was gone. The silence that fell was absolute. The humming had stopped. The purple light had vanished. The container was just a pile of inert, dark crystal shards on the floor. Morvana lay in a heap, unconscious but breathing. High-end scanners showed her life signs were stable, though she would need significant medical attention. "The princess," Thraxus said, his voice raw with a hope so fragile it was barely audible. They rushed to the adjacent room. Kaith was still asleep on Marina's simple cot. But her sleep had transformed. The painful tension was gone from her small body. Her scales, while still pale, no longer looked like dead stone. A faint, healthy shimmer was returning to them, catching the light from the hallway. As they watched, her chest rose and fell in a deep, steady, rhythmic breath. Her eyes fluttered open. They were clear, bright, and wonderfully, vitally alert. "Papa," she whispered, her voice stronger than it had been in months. Emperor Thraxus, the terrible, scourge of the Outer Rim, fell to his knees beside the simple cot. The mighty armor clanked against the floor, and a sound escaped him, a deep, shuddering sob of release. His massive, clawed hands, capable of tearing battleships apart, gently cradled his daughter's small form as she nestled against his chest, her wings fluttering with a renewed, healthy energy. "I'm hungry," Kaith announced. And everyone in the room, Thraxus, Marina, even the ever-professional Pion, laughed. It was a laugh born of relief, of joy, of a shared ordeal survived. In the days that followed, as Kaith's recovery accelerated at a miraculous pace, the full story emerged. Morvana, once she recovered, provided a full testimony. She spoke of a secret society of dragons, followers of the old ways who believed the dragon purity was being irrevocably diluted. Nyxara's spirit, somehow, had managed to communicate with them from the Shadow Realm, providing instructions for the binding ritual. The society was quietly disbanded, its members offered exile or a chance to reintegrate through re-education. Morvana herself chose a different path. She requested to serve as the palace's official historian, tasked with documenting the old ways, not as dogma to be followed, but as a history to be understood and learned from, so its mistakes would not be repeated. Marina found herself in a position she had never imagined. The Emperor offered her any reward she could desire. Wealth beyond a human's comprehension, a territory of her own to govern, even a title of nobility within the Dragon Empire. She refused them all. But why? Thraxus had asked, genuinely puzzled. You have done what my entire empire could not. You could have anything. Marina had simply smiled, watching from a balcony as Kaith, now bursting with energy, played a chasing game with floating light sprites in the palace gardens, her laughter echoing like tiny bells. I already have everything I need, Your Majesty. A purpose, a home, and the trust of a child who needed me. The Emperor had nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning in his ancient eyes. The human concept of family, it is different from ours, isn't it? It's not just about blood or species. It's about choice, Marina explained softly. Choosing to care for someone. Choosing to stay. Choosing to fight for them. Even when it's dangerous, even when you're afraid. 3 weeks later, Marina was reading to a fully recovered Kaith from a new book, a story about the first cooperation between dragons and humans in the early days of the coalition. The princess, now a bundle of endless questions and energy, kept interrupting. Marina, Kaith asked, her head tilted. Why did great-grandmother Nixara's ghost want to hurt me? Marina set the book down, choosing her words with care. She would not fill this child with hate for her own ancestry. She didn't want to hurt you, sweetheart. Not really. She wanted to change you. To make you into something you're not. Sometimes people who love us, or think they know what's best for us, get confused. They think their way is the only way. Like when Papa didn't want me to learn human games because he thought they were too simple. Kaith asked, her youthful logic piercingly accurate. Marina smiled. Exactly like that. But your Papa learned, didn't he? He did, Kaith said, giggling. He even plays chess with me now, though he always complains the board is too small for his claws. They laughed together, and Marina felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with biology or borders. This strange, wonderful family she had found among the stars was worth more than any treasure in the Emperor's vaults. That evening, Thraxus found Marina in the palace library, surrounded by data slates on dragon mythology. Still trying to understand us, human, he rumbled, but there was a warmth in his tone that hadn't been there before. Marina looked up from her reading. Every day, Your Majesty. Though I'm learning that dragons aren't so different from humans in the ways that truly matter. How so? You love your children. You fear losing them. You make mistakes trying to protect them. And sometimes, you need help from the most unexpected of places. Thraxus settled his massive form onto the reinforced library floor, his tail curling around him. I owe you a debt I can never repay. You saved my daughter when all my power, all my resources, failed. You don't owe me anything, Marina said softly. I did what anyone would do. I paid attention. I looked in the one place nobody else thought to look, because it seemed too simple, too obvious. Under the bed, Thraxus mused. Such a human thing. Checking under the bed for monsters. We dragons sleep on platforms specifically to avoid anything hiding beneath us. It made us blind. Sometimes, Marina observed, being small means you learn to look for dangers the large and powerful stride right over. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the only sound the soft hum of the library's environmental systems. "I've been thinking," Thraxus said, breaking the quiet, "about what Nyxara said. About diluting our heritage. She was wrong about so much, but perhaps there was a grain of truth in her fear. Not that we should isolate ourselves, but that we should not forget who we are." "We shouldn't lose our heritage," Marina agreed. "But heritage isn't about keeping bloodlines pure or rejecting change. It's about passing down stories, wisdom, and values, while having the courage to adapt to new realities. That," Thraxus said, "is why I approved Morvana's proposal to document the old traditions. And why I'm approving your proposal as well." Marina blinked in surprise. "My proposal? The one you were going to make about creating an integrated education program for Kaith," the Emperor said, a faint glint of humor in his eyes. "Combining dragon tradition with knowledge from all the coalition species, including those field trips to human colonies." Marina laughed. "How did you know? I am a tyrannical emperor. It is my job to know everything." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Also, Hyan told me he intercepted your draft on the Palace Network. I should have known better than to trust dragon technology with human secrets." "Indeed. Though I must say, your ideas are interesting. Kaith would benefit from seeing how other species live, from understanding that strength has many forms." And so they talked, late into the night cycle, a dragon emperor and a human woman, planning the future education of a princess, united by a love that had bridged the vast emptiness between their worlds. 6 months later, the palace hosted its first integrated festival. It was no longer just a celebration of the twin suns, but a commemoration of all the coalition's diverse cultures. The halls were filled with the scents of 100 different cuisines, the sounds of a dozen different musical traditions. Kaith, her scales shimmering with vibrant health, flew gracefully between the floating pavilions, greeting guests in multiple languages and teaching young humans the basics of a traditional dragon flying game. Marina watched from the Emperor's private balcony, standing beside Thraxus and Hyan. Morvana was there too, having become an unexpected ally in their efforts to bridge the old and the new. "She's remarkable," Morvana said, her voice filled with a genuine, unforced awe as she watched Kaith. "She honors our heritage while embracing the future. She had good teachers," Thraxus said, his gaze shifting meaningfully to Marina. Marina shook her head, a soft smile on her face. She had what she needed most. People who loved her enough to look beyond the obvious. To question tradition when it became a chain, and to accept help from unexpected sources. "Speaking of the unexpected," Hyan interrupted, consulting his ever-present data pad, "I'm detecting an unusual energy signature from the princess's room. It's benign, but unfamiliar." A familiar tension gripped them all. "Not again," Thraxus growled, the memory of the binding still fresh. They moved as one, a swift, worried procession to Kate's chambers. But what they found there made them all stop on the threshold, staring in amazement. The room was filled with a soft, golden, multifaceted light that seemed to emanate from beneath the floating bed. This time, when Marina knelt and lifted the decorative covering, she found not a curse, but a wonder. It was a collection of gifts. Dozens of them. A hand-carved wooden figurine from the human delegation. A quantum crystal from the ethereal athetherons that pulsed with soft light. A poem written in coherent photons by the photonic collective, hovering in a contained field. A small, woven tapestry from the insectoid Cathair. There were toys, artifacts, and artworks from every species that had attended the festival. Kate flew into the room behind them, her eyes sparkling. "It's my treasure hoard," she announced proudly. "Papa said every dragon needs a hoard. But I wanted mine to be special. So I'm collecting friendship gifts." Marina's heart felt too large for her chest. "But why? Under the bed?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Kate smiled, a mischievous, knowing glint in her eyes that was so like her father. "Because that's where monsters hide, you told me. But if I fill that space with good things, with memories of friendship and love, then there's no room for monsters anymore." Tears welled in Marina's eyes, spilling over and tracing paths down her cheeks. From fear to joy, from darkness to light, from ancient hatred to new understanding. The space under the bed had been transformed, just as they all had. Emperor Thraxus spread one massive, sheltering wing, drawing Marina, Payan, and Morvana into its protective shadow. Dragon and human, traditionalist and modernist, past and future, all held together in a single, perfect moment of unity. "No room for monsters," he agreed, his voice softer than Marina had ever heard it. "Only room for family." As the twin suns set, casting long, peaceful shadows across the palace, Marina knew that the greatest adventures, the most important discoveries, and the most powerful magic were not always in grand battles or cosmic wonders. Sometimes, they were found in the simplest acts of caring, of watching, and of having the courage to look into the dark, unexpected places, and to bring what you found into the light.